If you or someone you know grew up poor, you're probably already aware that being poor is kind of like living in the recent past. You get all of your movies late when they come to DVD or home release or Netflix, if you even get them at all. You get the previous generation's games. You get hand-me-down clothes, or things that are out of fashion, or things from thrift stores. And on the world stage, this is even more of a thing. There's people living in grass huts wearing Mickey Mouse t-shirts. And it cuts both ways, too, because people at the extreme high end of the economic scale are also basically living in the future. They get access to things that you and I won't get for a very long time. And that's even if you're middle class. The saying goes, the future is already here, it just isn't evenly distributed. Now, this doesn't work perfectly if you're at the bottom of the economic scale, but if you're like at the top of the bottom, then you have enough resources to look back into the past to see if there are techniques or methods or materials that you can use to greatly improve your life. And the funny thing about all of that is, if you turn the clock back 150 years, the richest person alive has a worse quality of life than you do right now, because they don't live in a world where air conditioning even exists. Their medical care is terrible. Their life expectancy is terrible. The world is a dirty place for them. And they don't have YouTube. Now, that's not like a 100% across the board. I'm sure that the people that were that fabulously wealthy had less to worry about on a day-to-day basis than you and me. But the point stands that, like, the fixtures of our quality of life, artificial lighting even, is way beyond the scope of what they had to the scale that we have it. Which is funny to think about. Like, what is the best standard of living? Like, if you had all of the timeline to choose, the best standard of living is probably going to be as far into the future as you can get without, dying in a nuclear apocalypse or the climate wars or something. But what's the minimum now? Is the minimum just whatever you were born into? Do you think you could be comfortable with, like, what in the 1800s would be a middle-class life? Do you think you could be fine there? How about the 1910s? Like, what's your minimum? Where do you draw the line on that? The more I look into, not the history of events, because the history of events is boring, but the history of, like, daily life for different people at different levels, the more I think that my minimum is actually pretty low. And if you've ever gone camping for an extended period of time, you probably get a bit of that feeling too. Like, you can actually live comfortably with not much. Now, it would require more skills of you. I'm not saying, like, go pitch a tent out in the woods and then live there forever, because you'll probably die of starvation or malnutrition, which is basically starvation but slower. Or bears. Bears will eat you. But as I think about employing elements of the old-timey world, a lot of it isn't something that you can reasonably do unless you shut yourself out of society. It's kind of like the opposite of off-gridding, where I'm still surrounded by the fixtures of society. If I want a hamburger, I can get a hamburger in like 10 minutes. But now I connect these two lines of thought. I think there's got to be some techniques, some materials, some tools that I can use that would dramatically improve my life quality for pennies, or I could take the amount of resources that I'm turning over right now and stretch it out a lot farther if I use some of the methods of previous days. Because a lot of the old-timey ways can be pretty cheap. Honestly, obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is, like, one of the current premises of this channel, which is, like, craft. Now, some of that's not fair, because A lot of people who are extremely poor aren't just poor in like the pocket sense, they're poor in time. You can't spend the time to do anything because all of your time is taken up by trying to survive. But you don't have to get very far outside of that range before you can make some dramatic improvements. Thread is cheap. Needles are cheap. Clothing is not. But so, naturally, if you have a shirt that wears out, like the seam on this shirt, this one, tore right here, about 2 inches across. I could fit 2 fingers through it. And it looks fine because I just fixed it. Because they don't make this anymore. If I want this, I can't get it. And if I could, I wouldn't. I hate buying clothing because I always feel like I'm being ripped off. Because there's no way that a shirt should cost $25. So you learn to repair things. One of the channels that I've been watching a lot lately has been James Townsend and Sons, and looking at all the old recipes. But in the broadest sense, what that got me thinking of is baking is pretty cheap. Vegetables are really cheap. You can get a pound of vegetables for under $1. Flour can be 5 cents per ounce. And there's obviously other crafts besides that. Like these DVD shelves here. Alright, shelves full of expensive movies is probably not the best example for the point that I'm trying to make. But like, take the shelves for what they are. What would you expect that to be at like a Walmart or something? These are both about 4.5 feet tall, something like that. Together, they were $5. That includes all the fittings, like these are made with 1.25-inch nails. I'd probably use something else that's just as strong, but a lot cheaper now. But, you know, that's for a video for the future. The tools to make these things are also pretty cheap. A pencil for your layout lines, a tape measure and a ruler, both from Dollar Tree, as $1 a piece. You can get a hammer that's a decent quality hammer from an antique store or a thrift shop or something like that for like $2. And my saw here, which is probably the nicest of any of the tools that I just mentioned, was $9 at Harbor Freight. Including the nails, for a box of nails, that brings your total expenses to about $19.50, thereabouts. And if you know what you're doing, and you do because you watch this channel, then you could knock those together in about half an hour each. But it doesn't have to be DVD shelves. It could be anything with a simple construction like that. There's a lot of ways to stretch the things that you make and dramatically enrich your life. And I've got other examples of things that have made a huge difference in my quality of life for close to nothing. Here, I'll put a picture in of the rack that I keep my kitchen utensils on. That was $1.10 worth of materials. And that makes such a big difference in my quality of life. There was a while there, not that long ago, where I didn't have access to refrigeration. But it brought me a lot of joy to be able to have popcorn. Because, as you know, if you can manage to afford life's luxuries, you can do without its necessities. So I had popcorn. And for a popcorn, to not have butter, that's just, incomplete. So I looked into and successfully made clarified butter. That is, it's got all the things that rot taken out of it. So this is shelf stable with no refrigeration for 3 months. And then I also made ghee, which is the exact same process, but a little bit longer. And ghee, at least it's claimed, can last up to a year. I'm not going to try that, but because I'm going to eat it, so, like, it's only going to last me, like, a month for this amount. But the flavor's so much richer, too. It's, like, concentrated. And to get this much of it at a supermarket cost $12. To get this whole thing right here cost me $3. And I get more for that $3. According to the jar, this is 12 ounces. It's a good amount. To take other pages from the past, there's also like a different attitude to it. You are able to deal with things a lot better by not resisting it. Like when I'm out in the cold, okay, I have a pretty thin denim jacket, and that will be what I wear, maybe with a scarf. That's my outfit, no matter how cold it is outside. And if you think about shivering out in the cold, but if you can like still yourself, let the cold move past and around you, and don't struggle against it, it becomes easier to deal with. You can actually very comfortably handle much colder temperatures by not shivering that way. At least I can. A tip I got when I was switching over to intermittent fasting, the hardcore kind where you only eat once a day, is that before your body adjusts to the new schedule, there's going to be some problems, obviously. But if you knowingly acknowledge the fact that you have made the decision to be hungry for this period of time, it's a lot easier to deal with. It's easier to just push that off into its own little box and leave it aside and not have it distract you constantly. If it's hot, I used to beg for air conditioning if I was outside for more than 30 minutes. I work outside quite a lot now in much higher temperatures than I ever thought I would, by just accepting that it was going to be hotter that day and just allowing yourself to be hot. And that doesn't mean that I don't want more, like I'm just resigned to my bad lot in life if it's something that's a legitimate problem, but clocking the spacing on it and the timing to solve this problem and being at peace with how things are until I can enact that solution makes a huge difference. I talked a little bit ago about intermittent fasting, and that's another important thing that I think about from the past, which is like a pre-agriculture society isn't eating the way that we're eating. You aren't necessarily having the amount of food that we have now every single day, which means that that's not what we're built for. The way that we're eating now with like the constant sugar is not what we're designed for. We're designed to spend a decent amount of time in ketosis. You're burning fat. And people are still skeptical about that kind of thing, but let me ask you, when your body is trying to store extra calories, does it store it as sugar or fat? Like, I'm not doing it for cost savings. I'm doing it for health reasons. But I'm taking one of the fundamental expenses that people have and cutting it into a third. That's pretty good. And I don't feel like I'm depriving myself of anything, because while I do try to do ketosis for like a couple of days in a row, I don't have to. And I can still have the things that I like. Today, I ate half a pizza. In a lot of ways, I'm freer with a diet like that, because you don't have to schedule things out in a ketogenic fashion in order to get the same benefits that keto bros are getting, because it just happens. And when I'm not doing it, because, I've broken that schedule a couple of times over the past year, I notice how much of a time sink food is, and how I would use it to procrastinate from doing things. Like, I'm working on something for a client. I'm working on a commission. Well, I wake up in the morning and I think, I better work on that thing, but I gotta eat first. And so, I drag my feet, making something to eat, and I would eat it, and I would let that settle. And by that time that I've let that settle, and I'm able to start working, I have already distracted myself with something that I should not have distracted myself with. And then by the time I pull myself out of that distraction, it's time to eat again, and then 3 days go by. Or maybe that's just me. Maybe I just have bad habits. Wasn't this about something else? I've gotten way off track. So there's not much of a craze for life hacks anymore. It was real popular a couple of years ago, and then all of it suddenly died when everybody realized that half of them were just being made up and do a worse job than a purpose-built tool. Here's a life hack that I've got for you. Using a product for its intended purpose. I hated those. Well, I was thinking back on those life hack things, and they looked a lot like the tips you would find in home magazines in, like, the 40s. You can find similar stuff in, like, Boy Scout manuals from the era. Like, there's plenty of images online. If I can find one in, like, 10 minutes of Googling, I'll put something right here as an example. But there's lots of tips that they have that were just life hacks, but for the bygone era. And those tips all still work. Things like using vinegar as a household cleaner, because it's some pretty powerful stuff. Or like, here's a hot tip for you. If you want to extend the life of something that's iron-based or steel-based, like if it's starting to rust, take any piece of aluminum, get it wet with water, rub it on that piece of steel, and it will suck the oxygen out of the rust and turn it back into iron, producing iron oxide powder in suspension in the water as you're rubbing it back and forth. The water will turn gray, is what I'm saying. And aluminum oxide is a polishing agent, so it will also polish the thing that you're rubbing that on. You can use that to rejuvenate things that are wearing down, or prevent them from just degrading. I actually still keep a piece of aluminum foil in my wallet for exactly that reason. Because sometimes something will just be breaking down, and I'll have this, and this is a lifetime supply. I'm never going to need more than this for my whole life. And I gotta be honest, I don't have all of these just coming to me off the top of my head, because all of the tips that I've picked up are just so ingrained into my life now. Like, it took me a while to think about the fact that I had even repaired this shirt because of how natural it seems to do that. Like, in a minute or two, I'm going to be taking some of the mahogany over there, and I'm going to be cutting and carving a new button because I lost the button that goes to a pair of pants. It's easier than you think it is, and it doesn't take very long. Helps that I have the tools to do it, but, you know, I've been making stuff for myself for around the house for a long time. Oh, duh. One of the other really obvious ones is that a whetstone from Dollar Tree will put all of your kitchen knives in the best shape you've ever seen anything, and it does not take very long to learn. You don't even need the Dollar Tree kitchen knife. I made a video a long time ago about how you can sharpen knives on the back of a coffee cup. Just anything ceramic will do. I still recommend the whetstone because it's easier to learn to maintain a consistent grind angle if you're using it on a whetstone, but the option exists for you to not. Anyway, look at the old methods and you'll see that you can probably figure out a way to do a lot more with a lot less.